You look a bit thoughtful today. Everything okay? Oh, yeah. Well, mostly. I have this short one-on-one meeting with my manager in about an hour, and for some reason, my hands are actually a little cold. Really? You've been working together for a while now, haven't you? I know, that's the funny thing. But every time I need to bring up something important, like asking for extra time on a task or sharing a concern, I suddenly feel like I'm back in school, standing outside the principal's office.
That feeling is so relatable. Honestly, I used to feel the exact same way years ago. The moment that calendar reminder popped up on my screen, my stomach would do a little flip. Yes, exactly. It's like my mind just goes blank. I rehearse what I want to say 10 times in my head, but as soon as I join the call, all those nice, natural phrases just vanish. You know what completely shifted things for me back then? I realized I was viewing my manager like an examiner, someone waiting to catch my mistakes, instead of a teammate who just has a different job title. An examiner. Wow, that is so true. I guess I'm always worried about sounding unprofessional or coming across as unprepared, which is totally normal. But in reality, most managers just want 3 simple things during a quick check-in: clarity, honesty, and solutions, or at least options when there's a problem. They're not looking for a formal presentation. Wait, options? What do you mean by giving options? Well, think about a situation where you can't finish a report on time. Instead of just saying, "I need more time," which leaves all the decision-making on them, you give them a choice. You could say something like, "I can send you a draft of the main section today, or I can deliver the full report by tomorrow at noon. Which works better for you?"
Oh, wow. That completely changes the feel of it. It doesn't sound like an excuse at all. It sounds like you're actually managing the situation.
Exactly. Managers love that because you're taking the pressure off them. They don't have to figure out a solution from scratch. You're bringing options to the table.
That makes so much sense. But what about when you genuinely don't know how to solve a problem? Like if something unexpected breaks and you're just stuck.
That happens to everyone, and it's completely okay to admit it. The key is timing. Instead of waiting until the deadline passes, you bring it up early.
Right, before things start burning down.
Precisely. You can just say, "I've run into a small roadblock with this project, and I'd love to get your input." See how natural that is? You're inviting them to collaborate with you.
Run into a small roadblock. I really like that phrase. It sounds calm and professional. I usually just panic in my head.
We all do it first, but when you frame it like that, it shows you're handling it professionally, not panicking.
So the goal isn't to pretend everything is perfect, but to show that you're aware of the situation and taking action.
You nailed it. And honestly, managers respect transparency far more than last-minute surprises.
I'm actually starting to feel a bit better about this meeting now. But what if she brings up feedback on something that didn't go as planned? That's usually when I freeze up the most.
Receiving feedback in the moment. That is definitely tricky, especially in a second language. Your brain is trying to translate while your emotions are reacting.
Exactly. My immediate instinct is either to get defensive and explain why it happened, or just nod quietly and agree, even if I don't fully understand what I did wrong.
Both of those are completely natural reactions, but there's a middle ground that works so much better. You don't have to defend yourself, and you don't have to agree instantly either. You just need to show that you're taking in the information.
How do you phrase that without sounding like you're making excuses?
You can use a simple line, like, "Thank you for pointing that out. I see what you mean." Or if you need a second to process it, try, "That's really helpful feedback. Let me take a moment to reflect on that."
Let me reflect on that. I love that. It gives me permission to take a breath instead of trying to come up with a perfect reply right on the spot.
Precisely. It buys you time, and it shows maturity. You're acknowledging their perspective without panicking.
And what if their feedback isn't completely clear? Like if they say, "We need to make this project more impactful," but I don't really know what impactful means in that context.
Then you ask for a concrete example. You can say, "To make sure I'm on the right track, Could you give me a quick example of what that would look like?
Exactly. Asking for a specific example turns vague criticism into something clear and actionable. It shows you genuinely want to improve, not just smile and nod.
That makes so much sense. I feel like most of my anxiety came from trying to guess what my manager wanted, instead of just asking directly.
It's completely normal. We often feel like asking questions makes us look like we don't know what we're doing. But in reality, high-performing teams communicate constantly to stay aligned.
Right. So, okay, I've got giving options when I'm delayed, mentioning roadblocks early, taking a breath with feedback, and asking for clear examples. What about wrapping up the meeting? How do I end it on a strong note?
The wrap-up. That's actually the easiest part to make a great impression. Before you jump off the call, just summarize your next steps in 1 or 2 sentences.
Like, okay, so I'll send you the draft by 2 o'clock, and you'll check with marketing about the budget.
Perfect. You can start with, just to make sure we're on the same page, I'll. That shows accountability, and it gives your manager a chance to correct any quick misunderstandings before you both get back to work.
Just to make sure we're on the same page. Man, these phrases are so simple, but they sound so polished.
Because they're clear and direct. Professional English isn't about using big, fancy words. It's about being clear, respectful, and calm.
Look at the time. My meeting starts in 10 minutes. My hands aren't even cold anymore.
Look at that. You've got this. Just treat it like a conversation between 2 people working toward the same goal.
Hey, do you have a quick second? I just finished the meeting.
Oh, perfect timing. I was just wondering how it went. You look remarkably relaxed.
I am. Honestly, I can't believe how much of a difference those small phrase shifts made.
Really? Tell me everything. Did you end up bringing up the delay?
I did. When we got to that project, instead of panicking, I just said, I've run into a small roadblock with the timeline, but I have 2 options we could look at. And you know what she did?
She took a breath and actually listened?
She smiled. She literally said, thank you for bringing options instead of just a problem. We picked one, agreed on tomorrow noon, and moved right on.
That is awesome. See? You didn't make excuses. You took control of the situation.
And at the end, I used the wrap-up phrase. I said, just to make sure we're on the same page, I'll send over the main draft today. She was so impressed. It felt like a real collaboration instead of an interrogation.
Because that's what it was. Managers are just trying to keep projects moving, you know? When you show up with clarity and options, you're making their job 10 times easier.
I feel like a whole weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I used to dread these one-on-ones so much.
It's amazing how much power is hidden in just a few clear, calm words. You handled that like a total pro today.
Thanks to you. I'm actually kind of looking forward to our next check-in now.
Now that's what I like to hear.
You know, what strikes me most about what you just said is how quickly your energy shifted once you changed your mindset.
It really did. Before, I was so focused on trying to speak perfect English that I completely forgot I was just having a conversation with another human being.
That's the trap so many of us fall into. We treat workplace conversations like a test where we're graded on every word, instead of seeing them as an ongoing partnership.
Right. And when you're terrified of failing the test, you freeze. But when you treat it like a partnership, it actually feels almost natural. Even when my grammar wasn't perfect, she didn't care at all. She just cared that we were solving the problem together.
Exactly. Most managers aren't listening to grade your vocabulary. They're listening to see if they can trust you, rely on you, and work with you. The clarity comes from your intention, not from using fancy words.
I think I'm starting to realize that confidence isn't about knowing every single word in English. It's just about having a few solid, reliable phrases so you don't panic when things get tricky.
Honestly, that's true for native speakers too. Having those simple go-to phrases gives your brain enough breathing room to actually think and listen.
Well, now that I survived this one-on-one, I feel like I might actually be ready for the big quarterly presentation next week.
Now, that is a whole different story. But hey, one win at a time. Coffee first?
Definitely. Coffee is definitely required after that win.
Here you go. One hot coffee. Well deserved.
Thanks. You know, sitting here now, it's funny. I used to think speaking up in front of a manager was impossible without feeling terrified.
It really takes practice. But once you realize they're looking for solutions, not perfection, everything changes.
True, though now that I survived the one-on-one, my mind is already jumping to the next hurdle. What happens when we're in a bigger team meeting and I actually disagree with an idea?
Oh, team meetings. That's a classic one. Disagreeing with your manager in public feels way higher risk, doesn't it?
Exactly. In a private one-on-one, it feels safe. But in a room full of colleagues, I'm always scared of sounding disrespectful or, I don't know, creating tension.
That fear is super common, but there's a massive difference between being aggressive and offering a different perspective. It all comes down to how you frame it.
How do you frame a disagreement without making everyone uncomfortable? Well, first, you validate the original idea before adding your thought. Instead of saying, no, that won't work, you say, that's an interesting approach. Have we considered how it might affect the timeline? Have we considered? Ooh, that puts the focus on the situation, not the person. Right on the money. You're asking a question that opens a door rather than closing one. You're inviting the team to think together.
I love that. It turns a potential argument into a team discussion. What if I want to offer an alternative idea directly?
You can use a phrase like, building on that idea. What if we also tried? Or another angle we could look at is building on that idea. That sounds so positive, even if you're taking the conversation in a totally different direction. Because you're honoring what was already said, it keeps the energy collaborative.
That really lowers the pressure. But what about when a meeting is moving super fast? You know, when people are talking over each other and you miss a point, but you're afraid to slow everyone down?
Oh, fast-paced meetings can be intimidating even for native speakers. The secret there is realizing that asking for clarification actually shows you're engaged, not behind.
Really? Because every time I hesitate, the topic shifts, and then it feels way too late to say anything.
That happens all the time. But you can jump back in smoothly with a simple phrase like, before we move on, can I double-check one quick detail?
Can I double-check one quick detail? Oh, I like that. It sounds like I'm just verifying facts, not lagging behind.
Exactly. Or if someone explained a complex idea really quickly, you can rephrase it in your own words. So if I'm understanding correctly, we're planning to...
That gives the other person a chance to say, yes, exactly, or correct any small misunderstanding right away.
Precisely. It shows you're actively listening and taking responsibility for clear communication. And honestly, half the room was probably thinking the exact same thing, but they were too shy to ask.
That is so true. Half the time, everyone is just nodding along, hoping someone else will ask.
Right? So by speaking up, you're actually doing the whole team a favor.
You know, there's one more situation that always makes my mind go completely blank.
Oh yeah? What's that?
Those awkward 2 minutes right before a meeting starts, when it's just you and your manager sitting on the call waiting for everyone else to join.
Haha, the infamous pre-meeting silence. That is a classic. You're just staring at each other's webcams, wondering who's going to break the ice.
Exactly. I always panic. Do I ask about their weekend? Do I talk about the weather? Half the time, I just pretend my microphone is muted while I frantically search my brain for something normal to say.
We've all been there. But small talk doesn't need to be complicated. In fact, keeping it simple and light is always best.
What do you usually say?
If it's Monday or Tuesday, a simple, "How was your weekend?" or "How's your week starting off?" How's your week starting off? Works every single time. It's polite, low pressure, and gives them room to share as much or as little as they want.
Speaking of coffee, my brain usually needs another cup the second someone puts me on the spot in those meetings.
Ah, being put on the spot. That always causes a sudden heart rate spike, doesn't it?
A total spike. Suddenly, everyone looks right at you, and you feel like you're expected to deliver a brilliant answer in 2 seconds.
The secret is realizing that no one actually expects an instant answer. They just expect a thoughtful one. You're allowed to pause.
In my head, a 2-second pause feels like an absolute eternity.
It always feels much longer to you than to anyone else. To them, a quiet pause just makes you look composed. But if you need a moment to collect your thoughts, you can easily buy time naturally.
How do you buy time without sounding like you're completely lost?
You acknowledge the question first. You could say, "That's an interesting question. Let me think about how that fits into our current schedule."
Let me think about how that fits. Simple, but it gives your brain 5 whole seconds to catch up.
Exactly. And if you genuinely don't have the data right there, never guess. Just say, "I want to give you an accurate answer on that. So let me double check the figures and follow up with you after the call." I want to give you an accurate answer on that. Wow, that completely transforms "I don't know" into "I care about accuracy." Precisely. You're showing accountability rather than a lack of knowledge. Man, between handling delays, disagreeing politely, small talk, and buying time on the spot, I feel like I've built a whole new toolkit today.
It really is a complete toolkit. And you know, what's funny is that these aren't special phrases reserved only for language learners. Native speakers rely on them every single day to stay calm under pressure.
That actually makes me feel so much better. I always assumed native speakers just automatically knew what to say without having to think about it.
Not at all. People get nervous, they lose their train of thought, and they rely on those exact same structured phrases to keep the conversation on track. But speaking of keeping things on track, what about after the meeting ends?
The follow-up email. Don't even get me started. That's another place where I end up overthinking every single word.
Right? You sit there staring at an empty draft for 20 minutes, rewriting a simple 3-sentence email because you're worried about sounding too cold or too informal.
Yes, exactly. Should I write, "Hope you're having a great week"? Is "best regards" too formal? Should I use an exclamation mark, or does that make me look too excited?
The exclamation mark debate is so real. But honestly, a solid post-meeting email only needs 3 basic parts: a quick thank you, a summary of what was decided, and the immediate next step.
Keep it to 3 simple parts. Okay. How would that actually sound in plain English?
Something like, "Thanks for the great catch-up today. As discussed, I'll send over the updated slides by Thursday morning. Let me know if anything changes on your end."
As discussed. Simple, clear, and totally professional. No 20 minutes of agonizing over punctuation?
Exactly. In workplace communication, clarity always beats polite fluff.
It's funny how much energy we waste overthinking things like exclamation marks. But what about when you make an actual mistake? Like you sent the wrong file or missed a small detail in a report.
Oh, the classic sending the wrong attachment panic. We've all felt that cold drop in our stomach.
Yes, exactly. My instinct is usually to freak out, write a huge long email apologizing 10 times, and explain every single reason why it happened.
Which actually makes the mistake feel 10 times bigger than it really is.
Right? So, how do you handle it calmly without sounding like you're making excuses or being totally careless?
The trick is to state the mistake clearly, provide the fix immediately, and move on. You don't need a massive apology.
How would you say that in a quick email or message?
You could just write, "Please disregard the previous version. Here is the updated file with the correct figures."
Please disregard the previous version. That sounds so smooth. It's clear, it fixes the problem, and it doesn't sound dramatic at all.
Exactly. Or if you caught a mistake in a presentation before your boss did, you can say, "I noticed a small discrepancy in section 2, so I've corrected it for accuracy."
I noticed a small discrepancy. I'm writing that one down. It sounds like you're just doing quality control, not fixing a blunder. Because that's what you're doing. Everyone makes typos or misclicks. What managers care about is that you notice them, take ownership, and fix them quietly. It really comes down to focus, doesn't it? Focusing on the fix instead of the panic.
Always focus on the solution. That's what builds long-term trust faster than almost anything else.
Speaking of trust, there's one other thing that always gives me anxiety. Saying no when my workload is already completely full.
Setting boundaries. That is difficult for almost everyone, especially when you're communicating in a second language, because you don't want to sound unhelpful.
Exactly. Whenever my manager asks, "Could you take a look at this new project?" my instant reaction is just to say, "Yes, sure," even if I'm already drowning in tasks. Then I stay up late stressing about how to finish everything.
It's a really common trap. We feel like saying no makes us look incompetent. But in reality, accepting work you can't deliver on time damages trust far more than setting clear expectations up front.
Right, because then deadlines get missed anyway. So how do you push back without actually saying, "I don't want to do this"?
Instead of saying, "I don't have time," which can sound a bit dismissive, you shift the conversation to priorities. You make your manager part of the decision.
Making them part of the decision. How does that sound in practice?
You can say, "I'd be happy to help with this. Right now, my main focus is finishing the client report by Friday. Which of these 2 tasks should I prioritize?" Which of these should I prioritize? That is brilliant. You're not refusing the work. You're just asking them to help you manage your capacity. Precisely. You're showing that you're willing to help, but you're being honest about reality. It helps them see that adding something new means moving something else back.
And what if they say it's super urgent? Like, "I really need this done by 3 p.m. today."
Then you can say, "To give this the attention it needs, I would need until tomorrow morning." Would that work?
To give this the attention it needs. That sounds so respectful, yet firm. I'm definitely saving that line.
That phrase really is a lifesaver. Because when you say, "to give this the attention it needs," you're actually showing that you care about quality, not that you're trying to dodge work.
Exactly. But let's say I use that phrase and my boss still pushes back hard. Like, "I understand, but both of these tasks are top priority and need to be done by 5 p.m. What do you do then?
The classic everything is priority number 1 situation. That definitely happens. When it does, you don't argue. You just make the trade-offs crystal clear.
Trade-offs? Meaning laying out what will realistically happen?
Precisely. You stay completely calm and say something like, "Understood. I'll focus on both today. Just so you're aware, rushing them means I might not be able to double-check the client data, or section 2 might be brief. Is that okay?"
Just so you're aware. Oh, that's subtle but powerful. You're making them accept the risk instead of taking all that stress onto your own shoulders.
Right. Because as an employee, your job is to highlight the reality of the situation. Your manager's job is to decide if that risk is acceptable. Once you state it clearly, the decision is theirs.
That takes so much of the emotional weight off. I used to carry all that stress home with me, feeling like every tight deadline was my personal failure.
We all do that at first. But professional communication is really about setting clear boundaries and letting facts lead the conversation, not fear.
Looking back at how nervous I was an hour ago, it's crazy how much changes when you stop seeing your boss as an opponent and start seeing them as a collaborator.
That mindset shift is everything. Once you realize you're on the same team, the words just flow a lot easier. That phrase really is a lifesaver. Because when you say, to give this the attention it needs, you're actually showing that you care about quality, not that you're trying to dodge work.
Exactly. But let's say I use that phrase and my boss still pushes back hard. Like, I understand, but both of these tasks are top priority and need to be done by 5 p.m. What do you do then?
The classic everything is priority number one situation. That definitely happens. When it does, you don't argue. You just make the trade-offs crystal clear.
Trade-offs? Meaning laying out what will realistically happen?
Precisely. You stay completely calm and say something like, understood, I'll focus on both today. Just so you're aware, rushing them means I might not be able to double-check the client data, or Section 2 might be brief. Is that okay?
Just so you're aware. Oh, that's subtle but powerful. You're making them accept the risk instead of taking all that stress onto your own shoulders.
Right. Because as an employee, your job is to highlight the reality of the situation. Your manager's job is to decide if that risk is acceptable. Once you state it clearly, the decision is theirs.
That takes so much of the emotional weight off. I used to carry all that stress home with me, feeling like every tight deadline was my personal failure.
We all do that at first. But professional communication is really about setting clear boundaries and letting facts lead the conversation, not fear.
Looking back at how nervous I was an hour ago, it's crazy how much changes when you stop seeing your boss as an opponent and start seeing them as a collaborator.
That mindset shift is everything. Once you realize you're on the same team, the words just flow a lot easier. You know, speaking of looking at your manager as a collaborator, that mindset shift makes a massive difference when it comes to performance reviews, too.
Oh, performance reviews. Don't get me started. That's another thing that used to make my stomach flip completely upside down.
Right? Because it feels like you're being graded like a student again. But if you treat it as a partnership, the whole dynamic changes.
How do you mean? What does a partnership look like in a performance review?
Well, instead of just sitting there nervously waiting to receive a grade, you go in ready to talk about your growth and where you want to head next.
That sounds great in theory, but how do you actually bring up your career goals without sounding pushy or demanding?
It's all about framing it around your contribution to the team. You can say something like, I've really enjoyed working on this project lately, and I'd love to take on more responsibility in that area. What skills should I focus on developing?
What skills should I focus on developing? Ooh, that is so good. It shows ambition, but you're asking for their guidance instead of making a demand.
Exactly. You're inviting them to mentor you. It turns a scary review into a constructive career coaching session.
And what if you want to ask about opportunities for a raise or a new title down the line?
You connect it directly to expectations. Something like, I'd love to understand what success looks like for someone at the next level, so I can start working toward those goals.
So I can start working toward those goals. That sounds incredibly professional. It puts the focus on growth and performance rather than just money or titles.
Precisely. Good managers love seeing that kind of initiative because it tells them you care about doing great work and building a future with the team. You know, speaking of looking at your manager as a collaborator, that mindset shift makes a massive difference when it comes to performance reviews, too.
Oh, performance reviews. Don't get me started. That's another thing that used to make my stomach flip completely upside down.
Right? because it feels like you're being graded like a student again. But if you treat it as a partnership, the whole dynamic changes.
How do you mean? What does a partnership look like in a performance review?
Well, instead of just sitting there nervously waiting to receive a grade, you go in ready to talk about your growth and where you want to head next.
That sounds great in theory, but how do you actually bring up your career goals without sounding pushy or demanding?
It's all about framing it around your contribution to the team. You can say something like, I've really enjoyed working on this project lately, and I'd love to take on more responsibility in that area. What skills should I focus on developing?
What skills should I focus on developing? Ooh, that is so good. It shows ambition, but you're asking for their guidance instead of making a demand.
Exactly. You're inviting them to mentor you. It turns a scary review into a constructive career coaching session.
And what if you want to ask about opportunities for a raise or a new title down the line?
You connect it directly to expectations. Something like, I'd love to understand what success looks like for someone at the next level, so I can start working toward those goals.
So I can start working toward those goals. That sounds incredibly professional. It puts the focus on growth and performance rather than just money or titles.
Precisely. Good managers love seeing that kind of initiative because it tells them you care about doing great work and building a future with the team.
You know, hearing all of this makes me realize how much of performance reviews or any meeting with a manager is just about preparation and framing. But what about talking about your wins? That always feels so awkward to me.
Talking about your own achievements? Oh, absolutely. A lot of people feel like they're bragging if they bring up their accomplishments.
Exactly. I hate sounding like I'm showing off, so I usually end up saying almost nothing about what went well, which probably isn't great either.
Right. If you don't highlight your contributions, no one else will do it for you. The trick is to let the facts do the talking. You don't need to say, I'm amazing at this.
How do you state a win naturally then?
You focus on the outcome for the team. You can say, I was really happy to see the new process saved us 3 hours a week. Or, I'm proud of how smooth the project launch went.
I'm proud of how smooth the launch went. That sounds so genuine. It highlights the success without sounding arrogant at all.
Exactly. You're celebrating the result, not just boasting about yourself. And when you share credit with others, it sounds even better. Like, our team managed to streamline the process, and I was glad to lead that effort.
I was glad to lead that effort. I am definitely writing that one down. Looking back at where we started this conversation, I feel like a completely different person heading into work tomorrow.
You've come a long way in just one afternoon. It really all comes down to taking a deep breath, using clear phrases, and remembering that your boss is human too.
Seriously. Now, can we get another coffee? All this learning made me thirsty.
Deal. Lead the way.
Ah, coffee tastes so much better after a win.
It really does. You know, sitting here thinking about work, there's another area that's been popping up a lot lately. Modern daily communication.
You mean like workplace messaging apps, Slack, Teams, that kind of thing?
Exactly. Half the time, I'm not even speaking to my manager out loud. I'm typing quick messages. And somehow, that creates a whole different kind of stress.
Oh, absolutely. Without tone of voice or body language, text can feel so cold. You get a 2-word reply like, thanks, noted, and suddenly you wonder if they're secretly upset with you.
Yes, exactly. I spent 5 minutes staring at a message trying to decode what okay, fine actually means. Am I overthinking again?
Everyone does. But on messaging channels, short messages are usually just about speed, not hidden feelings. Your manager is probably just rushing between meetings.
That's good to remember. But how do you send quick updates without sounding rude or sending giant walls of text?
The trick with quick messages is putting the main point right in the very first line. You can start with a short context tag, like quick update on the report, or action needed, before your main sentence.
Quick update.
That makes it so easy for them to scan when they're busy.
Right. And if you're asking for something, instead of typing, "When can you look at this?" try, "No rush, but when you have a moment, I'd value your input on this draft."
I'd value your input. That sounds respectful without feeling needy or pushing them into a corner.
Precisely. It shows you respect their busy schedule, but still keeps things moving forward nicely.
That phrase really changes the whole tone. It takes away that feeling of pressure without sounding like you don't care. But what about when a text thread just keeps going and going?
The endless messaging loop. You know, where 10 messages back and forth could have been a 2-minute conversation?
Exactly. You type a question, they reply with another question, then you clarify, then they misunderstanding, and suddenly an hour of your afternoon is gone. How do you break that cycle without sounding abrupt?
That is such a common trap. When you notice a chat turning into a long chain, the best thing to do is suggest a quick verbal check-in.
How do you suggest that smoothly? Because calling someone out of the blue can give people a bit of a shock.
Oh, definitely. Never just call without warning. You can type something like, "This might be easier to talk through quickly. Do you have 5 minutes for a quick huddle?" Or, "Happy to hop on a brief call if that's easier."
Happy to hop on a brief call. I love that phrase. Hop on sounds so casual and lightweight. It doesn't sound like you're trying to schedule a massive formal meeting.
Exactly. It frames the call as a time saver for both of you. You're basically saying, "Hey, let me save us both from typing another long paragraph."
That makes so much sense. And what if you're the one who receives that message, but you're in the middle of deep work and really can't talk right now?
Then you set a gentle boundary. You can say, "I'm in the middle of finishing a task right now, but I can jump on a call at 2 o'clock. Does that work for you?"
I can jump on a call at 2. That lets them know you aren't ignoring them while still protecting your focus time.
Precisely. It's all about keeping communication clear and respectful of everyone's time.
Speaking of protecting focus time, what about when you get so focused that you completely miss a message for hours?
The classic late reply panic. You look down at your screen at 4 p.m. and realize someone sent you a question at 10 a.m.
Yes, exactly. And then the guilt immediately sets in. My instinct is always to write a massive apology. Like, "I'm so sorry for the late reply. I was stuck in 3 different meetings and then my laptop restarted."
Which, once again, turns a very minor thing into a huge ordeal. Most people understand that everyone gets busy during the workday. They aren't expecting you to be glued to your chat app every single second.
So, how do you respond naturally without sounding like you just committed a terrible workplace crime?
You swap the apology for appreciation. Instead of saying, "Sorry for the delay," you can say, "Thanks for your patience. Just catching up on messages now."
Thanks for your patience. Wow, that completely changes the energy of the conversation.
Right? It shifts the focus from your guilt to their patience. You can follow it up directly with the answer. "Thanks for your patience. To answer your question, the draft is ready."
That sounds so calm and grounded. It shows that you were focused on your work, not that you were being careless or ignoring them.
Exactly. Confidence in workplace English is often just about choosing gratitude over guilt. Speaking of choosing gratitude, there's another message trap people fall into all the time: asking for help when you're completely stuck on a task.
Oh, I dread sending those messages. Every time I can't figure something out, I hesitate for hours. I worry that if I ask my manager for help, they'll think I can't handle my job.
Which usually leads to wasting 3 hours struggling in silence, right?
Guilty as charged. I'll try 5 different things, get completely frustrated, and only ask when I'm practically in tears. How do you ask for help without looking incompetent?
The secret is showing your work before you ask the question. Never just send a message saying, "I don't know how to do this."
So, how do you phrase it instead?
You outline the steps you've already taken. You say something like, "I've tried option A and option B, but I'm running into an issue with the output. Do you have a suggestion on how to tackle this?"
I've tried option A and option B. That is so simple, but it changes everything. It proves you actually put in the effort first.
Exactly. It transforms you from someone who gives up easily into someone who is actively problem solving, but knows when to seek guidance.
And it saves your manager time too, because they won't suggest option A or B if they already know you tried them.
Spot on. Managers actually prefer when you ask for guidance after a reasonable effort, rather than wasting an entire day spinning your wheels.
Spinning my wheels? Yep, that describes my entire Tuesday last week.
We've all been there. Knowing when to ask for help is actually a skill, not a weakness.
You know, that idea of seeing asking for help as a skill really reframes things for me. But what about the other side of that? When you do ask for help or submit a draft, and your manager comes back with critical feedback.
Receiving feedback. That's another moment where our emotional brain tries to take over, isn't it?
Totally. The second I see red comments on a document or hear, "We need to fix this section," my brain translates it into, "You messed up and you're bad at your job." I instantly want to get defensive.
That defensiveness is such a normal human reaction. But in a professional context, feedback is almost never personal. It's just tuning the work, not criticizing the person who made it.
Intellectually, I know that. But in the moment, when you're sitting there trying to process the feedback and reply politely, it's hard not to freeze up or start making excuses. What do you say when you get unexpected criticism?
First, take a breath. You don't have to defend yourself. A great response is simply acknowledging their perspective. Thanks for highlighting that. I see what you mean.
Thanks for highlighting that. Wow, that completely diffuses the tension. It shows you're receptive, not defensive.
Right. And if you want to make sure you fix it correctly, you can follow up with, "How would you suggest I adjust this for next time?" Or, "I'll update that right away and send over the revised version."
I'll update that right away. It keeps everything focused on action. No drama, no long explanations, just forward momentum.
Exactly. When a manager sees that you take feedback calmly and turn it into action, their confidence in you actually goes up, not down.
That feedback conversation alone feels like a huge relief. But what about when you actually have to lead a project update or pitch an idea yourself?
Stepping into the spotlight. That's where imposter syndrome really loves to kick in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The moment everyone turns to me and says, "All right, take it away," my heart starts hammering. I'm always worried I'll lose my train of thought mid-sentence.
That fear of losing your train of thought is so real. But you don't need a formal presentation with 20 slides to sound compelling. You just need a strong opening frame.
How do you kick off an update so you sound clear and confident right out of the gate?
Give them the big picture first, then the current status. Something as simple as, "Today, I want to give a quick update on Project X, where we currently stand, and our main focus for next week."
Today, I want to give a quick update on... That sets a clear roadmap immediately. It tells everyone exactly what to expect.
Exactly. It keeps you on track, too. And if you do lose your place for a second, you just anchor back to your roadmap. Moving on to our main focus for next week.
Moving on to... That gives you an easy bridge to cross over to the next point without any awkward pauses.
Precisely. Bridges like moving on to, that brings us to, or to sum up, act like signs on a highway. They guide your listeners, and they keep your brain moving smoothly.
It really feels like having these small structural phrases gives you a safety net. You're not relying on luck, you're relying on structure.
That's the entire secret. Confidence isn't magic. It's just structure plus practice.
And speaking of structures, there's one specific moment in presentations that almost everyone dreads.
Oh, let me guess. The dreaded "any questions" at the very end?
Spot on. You finish your last slide, take a breath, and then total silence. Or worse, someone asks a super complex question that completely catches you off guard.
That is literally my worst nightmare. You stand there in front of the whole room while your brain just goes into complete panic mode.
It's so scary, right? But the secret to a great Q&A session isn't having an immediate answer for everything. It's about steering the conversation calmly.
How do you steer a Q&A when someone asks a really tricky or off-topic question?
If someone asks something way outside the scope of your presentation, you don't need to guess. You can just say, "That's an important point, but it's a bit outside our focus today. Let's take that offline."
Let's take that offline. The classic corporate phrase. I hear people say that all the time, but I never felt confident using it myself.
It's an absolute game changer. It politely protects the room's time without dismissing the person asking.
And what if you just need a second to understand a confusing question?
You rephrase it back to them. Say, "Just to make sure I understand, are you asking about the timeline or the budget?"
Just to make sure I understand. That buys you time, clears up confusion, and makes you look super attentive.
Exactly. It turns what feels like an interrogation into a clear, helpful exchange.
That taking it offline phrase is definitely going into my permanent rotation. But you know what else gets my pulse racing during online presentations?
Let me guess. Technical issues?
Yes, the dreaded screen share delay, or when your computer decides to freeze right when you start speaking. I instantly start apologizing and sweating.
Oh, technical glitches happen to literally everyone. Even after years of remote work, people still forget to unmute or share the wrong window.
Right, but when it happens to me, I feel like I lose all control of the room. How do you keep your cool when technology fails in front of 20 people?
The trick is to treat technology as a separate entity. It's not your failure, it's just a tool acting up. So instead of frantic apologies, you just give a calm status update.
A status update? Like what?
If your screen freezes, you can simply say, "It looks like my slide is taking a moment to load. Thanks for your patience, everyone."
It's taking a moment to load? That sounds so composed. It tells everyone, hey, don't worry, I've got this handled.
Exactly. Or if someone else is speaking while on mute, instead of bluntly yelling, "You're muted," you can politely say, "I think you might be on mute, Sarah."
I think you might be on mute. Small difference, but it sounds way kinder and smoother.
Because you're offering a helpful observation rather than pointing out a mistake. It keeps the whole meeting feeling supportive.
And what if your internet drops completely and you get kicked out of the meeting for 2 minutes?
When you join back, keep it brief. Apologies for the quick disconnect, everyone. Thanks for holding on. Where were we?
Where were we? Simple, direct, and gets everyone right back on track.
You know, what's interesting about technical glitches is how they often push meetings past their scheduled end time, and then everyone sits there awkwardly wondering how to leave.
Oh, absolutely. That happens to me all the time. The calendar says the meeting ends at 3, but at 3:05, people are still talking. I sit there sweating because I have another call, but I feel so rude just jumping out.
Right. You don't want to look like you're just ditching the team, but you also can't be late for your next commitment.
Exactly. So what do you say when you actually need to leave right on the dot?
The easiest way is to set expectations early. Or use a phrase like, "I have a hard stop at 3, so I'll need to jump off in a minute."
I have a hard stop. I love that phrase. It sounds completely professional and nobody takes it personally because it's just a schedule constraint.
Precisely. Hard stop is standard workplace English. Or if you're already at the end of the time slot, you can drop a quick message in the chat. "I need to hop off for another call, but thanks everyone."
That is so much better than sitting there in silent agony. What about if you're the one running the meeting and you want to wrap it up respectfully before it goes over?
Then you can take the lead and say, "To respect everyone's time, let's summarize our main points so we can wrap up in a minute."
To respect everyone's time. Wow, that doesn't sound rushed at all. It actually sounds like you're doing everyone a favor.
Because you are. Everyone in that meeting is usually secretly thanking you for bringing it to a clean close.
Wrapping up a meeting is one thing, but what about when you're right in the middle of a discussion and someone suggests an idea you completely disagree with?
Pushing back gracefully during a live conversation. That is definitely a high-pressure moment, especially in a second language, because direct translations can sound surprisingly harsh.
Yes. In my head, I just want to say, I don't think that's a good idea. But as soon as I think about saying it out loud, it feels way too blunt.
And it usually is. In professional English, native speakers rarely say, I disagree, or that's wrong directly. Instead, we use softening phrases to cushion the perspective.
Cushioning. How does that actually work in practice? What phrases can you use?
You acknowledge their point first, and then you pivot. For example, you can say, I see where you're coming from, but have we considered the timeline?
I see where you're coming from. That is so smooth. You're validating their thought before bringing up a potential issue.
Exactly. It shows you're listening, not just waiting for your turn to argue. Or if you want to suggest a completely different direction, you can say, that's an interesting approach. Another angle we could explore is...
Another angle we could explore. I love that. It makes it feel like you're adding options to the table, not wiping their idea off the board. Because that's what effective team communication is. You aren't fighting to win an argument. You're collaborating to find the best solution together.
Speaking of live discussions, what about those first 2 or 3 minutes before a meeting actually begins?
Oh, the dreaded pre-meeting small talk. That is honestly my least favorite part of online calls. You're just sitting there with one other person, waiting for the host to join, staring into the camera.
The quiet tension is so real. People panic because they feel like they have to talk about the weather or weekend plans, but they run out of things to say after 10 seconds.
Yes, exactly. I always end up saying, how's your week going? And then there's this awkward silence while we both realize we don't know what to say next. How do you keep that gap comfortable?
The secret is keeping it light, observable, and low pressure. You don't need a deep conversation. You just need a gentle bridge until everyone arrives.
What kind of bridge? Give me a phrase I can actually use.
You can focus on something immediate and neutral. Something like, how's your Tuesday treated you so far? Or are you having a busy morning on your end?
How's your Tuesday treated you so far? That sounds so warm. It feels way more natural than a flat, how are you?
Right. Or if you want to keep it even simpler, comment on something relatable. Just grabbing my second coffee before we start. Or hope you're getting a bit of a breather today. Hope you're getting a bit of a breather today. That shows empathy.
It acknowledges that everyone is busy without forcing them into a long conversation.
Exactly. Small talk before a meeting isn't about entertaining the other person. It's just a gentle nod that says, I see you, we're in this together, and we'll start in a moment.
That breather phrase is so gentle. It really sets a nice tone right from the start. But speaking of breathers, what about when you're literally about to take one, like at 4:30 on a Friday, and someone drops a message saying, hey, do you have a quick second?
The classic quick second that turns into an hour-long emergency. That is a very specific kind of workplace stress, isn't it?
Yes, my stomach instantly drops because a quick second is almost never actually quick. But if I say I'm busy, I worry I'll seem unhelpful. If I say yes, there goes my evening.
The pressure is real because you don't know what they're going to ask yet. The trick here is to establish your timeline before you dive into the issue.
Establish your timeline first. How does that work in practice?
Before jumping straight into problem solving, you set a boundary politely. You can say, I have about 5 minutes before I need to wrap up today. Is it something we can cover quickly, or should we schedule time tomorrow?
I have about 5 minutes before I need to wrap up today. That is so clear. It sets a boundary right away, but it still shows you're willing to help.
Exactly. It puts the ball in their court. They can either give you the 30-second summary or realize, oh, this is bigger than 5 minutes. Let's talk tomorrow.
And what if it's something truly urgent that really does need to be done today?
Then you acknowledge the urgency calmly. If it's urgent, I can take a look for 10 minutes now, but for a deeper dive, let's connect first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning. That sounds so reliable. You're not refusing to help, you're just managing expectations. Precisely. Managing expectations gracefully is what prevents burnout while keeping your reputation completely intact.
Looking back at everything we talked about today, from performance reviews and chat messages to handling criticism and setting boundaries, it really feels like a massive weight off my shoulders.
I'm so glad. You know, when you break it down, professional communication isn't about using fancy vocabulary or sounding like a textbook. It's really just about clarity, empathy, and giving yourself permission to take a breath.
Clarity and empathy. That's so true. I used to think I had to sound flawless, but now I see that having a few simple, polite phrases gives you total control over the conversation.
Exactly. Phrases like, thanks for your patience, or I have a hard stop at 3, aren't just words. They're tools that protect your peace of mind while keeping everything professional.
Tools that protect your peace of mind. I love that. Honestly, I'm actually looking forward to heading into work tomorrow, which is definitely something I didn't expect to say when we first sat down.
You're gonna do great. Just take it one conversation at a time. Remember that everyone else is just human too, and trust yourself.
Thanks for listening and talking through all of this with me. This coffee session was exactly what I needed.
Anytime. That's what friends are for. Now, should we head out before traffic gets crazy?
Definitely. Lead the way.